What's up guys, Brian Krantz here of ContestChampion.com. Today I just wanted to go over the mastery build that I used for my Labyrinth of Legends run with Gwenpool. Now before I get into the build itself, I have two very quick disclaimers to go over. The first is that this is a build specifically tailored for Gwenpool. Depending on what champion you bring in, your masteries might look vastly different than what you see on screen here. For example, with Star-Lord, you want to completely avoid the suicide masteries. You want nothing to do with them. They're going to hurt you way more than they actually help you out. The second disclaimer is that this is a build that I used from start to finish of my run. I did not alter it at all depending on the enemy that I was fighting. I wanted just one build that I could use to enter Labyrinth with all the way through and beat Maestro. But if you wanted to, you can definitely switch it around depending on the enemy that you're fighting. For example, if you're going up against a bleed immune opponent, then Deep Wounds is 100% useless. So if you wanted to, you can certainly swap around those points depending on who you're fighting. Alright, let's get into the build itself. So I have 6 points still remaining, and we'll go through those 6 points at the end. But first I wanted to explain kind of the core build that I have here and explain why each one of these points I feel is pretty much essential. I mean, of course, technically you could beat Labyrinth of Legends without a single mastery point if you wanted, but I feel like this is the best build. I tested a lot of builds, and I feel like this is the best. So the idea is to get as much damage as you possibly can while having just enough survivability in order to get that damage in. So therefore, I had to look at the suicide masteries first, and I had to test them out and see if they were worth it. And in my testing, the amount of damage that you do with the suicide masteries versus not having them is almost like a night and day difference. The damage output is so strong with the suicides. So I definitely wanted to have the suicides, especially with a champion like Gwenpool, where you're not really spamming your specials. A lot of your damage comes from applying the level 3 armor break on the opponent. In fact, in my testing, you pretty much double your damage by having that armor break on the opponent. So yeah, you definitely aren't using that many specials. You want to pretty much save your power meter for your special 3, which means you're not taking much damage from recoil. Technically right now recoil is bugged and you're not going to take any damage from activating your special 3, but even after Kabam fixes that, I still think that you wouldn't take all that much damage. If you use 5 specials in a fight, 25% of your total health, in order to gain 60% damage of having the suicide masteries, I feel like it's definitely worth it. Now, Deep Wounds is an absolutely essential mastery when it comes to Gwenpool, not only for just increasing her bleeds in terms of the bleed damage, but it's also the way that you extend the debuff durations on the opponents. So that armor break that I was talking about, that pretty much doubles your damage output, when that armor break is about to expire, if the opponent's bleeding, it will consume one of those bleeds and extend the duration of that armor break. And having Deep Wounds definitely eases that situation a little bit. You can't always guarantee that you're going to have a bleed up at the right time, but yeah, having Deep Wounds is just so important for doing that. Alright, and in order to get over to the right side of the tree, I need 15 points in the left half, which means I'm going to be maxing out Precision, which is pretty much an essential mastery regardless of what build you're going, regardless of the champion. It's such a good mastery. And then I also maxed out Cruelty. And Cruelty, unfortunately, doesn't scale as well as it used to. The rating that it shows, it definitely is a lot, but it doesn't scale quite as good as it used to, but I still think it's definitely worth having 5 out of 5 in. And then, of course, there's 5 points leading up to those 2 masteries. So this is like the core build of the offensive tree. Now, if we go over to defense real quick, before I get back to those final 6 points, in order to run the suicide masteries, you need willpower, and you need it maxed out. You need willpower maxed out, and you need recovery. You need both of these masteries maxed out in order to counterbalance the damage that you're taking from Liquid Courage. Liquid Courage is really the only damage that you're suffering from the suicides after Double Edge drops off, and Double Edge only lasts for 16 seconds, so that's why I opted to not get Coagulate here. If you're doing a lot of fights, if you're fighting very frequently, short fights, then having Coagulate to reduce that bleed damage is great, but in these long fights that last for several minutes, taking a little bit of extra damage for the first 16 seconds by not having Coagulate, not that big of a deal. The points that are required to get to willpower, I need 15 of those as well. Like I said, I already know that I need maxed out recovery in order to counteract the Liquid Courage damage. I'm also going to want block proficiency, or I did want block proficiency. I used, this mastery actually saved me a lot of health. If you saw the run, I'm actually terrible at intercepting. So a lot of the times, a lot of the ways that I found openings to get some damage in was just blocking, baiting out heavy attacks, basically treating the enemy as if they're stun immune, because in Labyrinth of Legends, enemies have a node that reduces the stun duration for every time they get stunned. So at a certain point, you can land a parry stun and you're not going to be able to attack them fast enough before the stun wears off. So having block proficiency is definitely a lifesaver in there for me, because I'm not able to intercept. Even if you can intercept, it's not a bad option to get, considering it also works when you're parrying. The other mastery that I like to max out is physical resistance. It's basically between physical resistance and perfect block for me, and I feel like physical resistance is just a better mastery. The physical resistance that gets added to your champions, depending on who they are, but for most champions they don't have any built-in physical resistance, and it actually is going to reduce your overall physical damage by about 6.5%, which of course is kind of better if we think about perfect block as reducing all damage by about 4% on average. 4% of all the blocks that you're taking will be reduced to 0. I just feel like physical resistance is just better all around. Not only does physical resistance work when you're blocking, but if you slip up and you actually get hit, it could be the difference between you dying and staying alive in order to get, an extra however many hits in before you eventually do die from that damage. In terms of the utility tree, here is where we have kind of an interesting decision. So parry and dexterity, of course, they are absolutely essential. You definitely want to pick up these two masteries. I think that 1 point in parry is fine because you're not really going to be parrying all that much. Like I said, you can only stun the opponent so many times. And because of that, 1 point I feel like is fine. Although I do have a parry testing video coming up very shortly as well. Stupefy is an interesting option though. The way Gwenpool works is if the enemy is bleeding, every time you attack them, you have a chance to stun them. And like I said, the way that stun works in Labyrinth of Legends, you can only stun them so many times. And I was thinking, well, I don't need Stupefy because I'm going to accidentally stun the opponent just by using my regular attacks, to the point where they're going to be immune to my stuns as it is. So I could just take those 3 points of Stupefy, put them elsewhere. But after testing both options, Stupefy is absolutely still worth it. First off, there are fights where you do not survive that long. Fights, where you can only get 50 or 100 hits in. When I recommend the way that you play with Gwenpool in Labyrinth is actually to use your parry stuns as fast as possible. If they have a special that you could bait out and do some damage that way, then of course still do that. But you don't want to save your parries for after they get into the second enrage. You do want to use them pretty much as fast as possible because you don't know when you're going to get hit and you don't know when you're going to die. Also, it helps against stun immune enemies such as Colossus, which was it was an awful fight, and Maestro, which was also a very difficult fight where those enemies, they don't bleed. Not against skill champions, at least. Maestro doesn't bleed against skill champions, the way his ability works. So in Labyrinth of Legends, at least. In Act 4, he'll still bleed, but in Labyrinth of Legends, he is immune to bleed from skill champions, which means you're not going to be applying that automatic stun, which means you can absolutely get the full benefit of having Stupefy and get those additional parries in. Not to mention, good luck surviving long enough against Maestro to the point where he actually is immune to all of your stuns. It's certainly doable, but the fight is tough, and chances are you're gonna get worn down or caught by a special one before that actually happens. Now these final 6 points, again, I want to get as much damage as I possibly can with these final points. So let's take a look around here and see what our options are. So our options are Pierce and Pure Skill, which will increase the damage when we land critical hits. However, if you have the L3 armor break on the opponent, their armor is at 0 anyway, so those are completely useless. Not to mention the way Pure Skill works, at a certain point apparently it doesn't work, and Kabam has said that they're working on ways to change around the Pure Skill mastery so that it's more beneficial for maxing out. So at a certain point maybe this mastery will be worth it, but at the time of recording it's not, and I recommend not putting any points there. So those two options kind of dead because, like I said, you already reduced their armor to 0. You don't get any extra benefits. You can't reduce them beyond 0 in the current state of the game. So what does that leave us with? Well, it leaves us with Courage, Assassin, Glass Cannon, And the other option I would say is lesser precision to get some extra crit damage in. Alright, so let's talk about each one of these. So Assassin, if we look at it, it increases your damage when the opponent is below 18%. Now, this is one of the masteries that I consider an amazing one-point wonder, because it not only does it increase your damage, but it also plays around the opponent's ability accuracy and that kind of thing when they get to a certain point, which can help against magic or maybe some other enemies, but magic is the only one on the easy path that comes to mind, at least. But let's just talk about the actual damage component of it. So 18%, when they're below 18%, that means that every 10% of damage you gain when they're below 18%, as that's how it scales up after the first point, you're actually only gaining 1.8% damage on average throughout the entire fight. It's really not that much damage if you think about it. The first point, you actually get 20%, which means you're gaining an average of 3.6% damage. And 3.6 is actually really strong, so we're going to add a point there. But against something like Glass Cannon, where you're getting 2.4 per level, I think that after the first point of Assassin, Glass Cannon is actually giving you more damage than Assassin will, so you definitely want to put those points in Glass Cannon versus Assassin. But we still have another option to look at, Courage. Now, Courage gives you way more damage, but of course it has that stipulation of you have to be below 50% health. Now, I tested it, and there's a video on my channel if you want to take a look at it, where it does not matter whether you start the fight below 50% health or you start above it and you drop down below 50%. Regardless of how you came about being below 50% health, you're going to gain that additional damage. And in Labyrinth of Legends, it's one of two strategies. Either you're not using suicide masteries and you're just going to pop a 40% revive or something like that, and you're already going to gain this damage, which it's an incredible amount of damage for only 3 points. You're getting 20% damage, so you definitely want it. Or if you're running the suicide masteries, the strategy that I went with was I healed up just enough so that the double edge damage from the start of the fight would drop me right below 50%, so that I can gain that additional 20% attack from Courage. It's absolutely worth it. It's such a strong mastery, so powerful of a mastery. Either way, that mastery is totally worth it. So I have 2 points left over, and that means it's pretty much between Glass Cannon and Lesser Precision at this point. And Lesser Precision, it's actually not that bad, but you're still going to get more damage at the end of the day from Glass Cannon. And the way that it currently works with the suicide masteries, you're gaining more. You're gaining it's a better ratio of the healing with willpower and liquid courage. You're able to maintain that ratio better. You're actually going to take a little bit less damage by having that mastery. So I think this is the best build. That's definitely the best build that I can come up with. I did test out other builds. I tested not having Stupefy, like I said. I tested having more points and lesser precision. Really, those are the only options. I tested not having the suicide masteries at all and putting those points elsewhere. If you don't want to have the suicide masteries, you can certainly go that route. You can drop the 7 points there. I would say still leave 3 out of 3 Glass Cannon, but you can drop the 7 points to the right of Glass Cannon. You can put those elsewhere. It's just that there's nowhere near as strong of an option at the moment. Maybe after they change up pure skill, maybe it'll be worth the 5 points, and then maybe dropping suicides will be a more comparable option. But for me personally, suicides is the way to go. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and hit that thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.